we just came down directly behind us is the so-called military road, essentially the Fort King Road, the same road that Major Dade walked on from Fort Brooke on his way to Fort King. Winfield Scott came down from Fort King on that same road. In the late December of 1835, the Seminole Indians initiated two actions which marked the beginning of the Second Seminole War. One was an attack on the Indian agent and a part of his party in Ocala, the Fort King area, at Fort King, I should say. And the second was what we'd call known as the Dade Massacre. Major Francis Dade and a whole bunch of his guys were killed within a very short amount of time, all at once, you know, in the same day. A couple of them straggled, a couple of them, one or two of them made it all the way back. A couple of them that straggled got killed on their way back because they were wounded. Within 2 months of that event, there were two major battles fought near here. We're standing in what is now called the Cove of the Withlacoochee. The greater area that we're in is the Cove of the Withlacoochee. It doesn't begin right here or whatever, but it's in this area. It's the Withlacoochee River, and it's a big area that was a stronghold for Seminole Indians. That's where they lived, and there was a whole bunch of them living there. So within 2 months of that event, in I think it was December, and then again in February, there were two major battles fought north of here. We're near present-day Inverness, for anyone that doesn't know. And those were not necessarily defeats; they were repulses. They were not successful from a federal military standpoint, and they weren't really successful from an Indian standpoint either, because the eventuality, the inevitability, was what occurred. The Indians were losers from the very beginning. They never had a real chance, as Indians everywhere in this country have never had a real chance. It was only a forestalling action, you know, just putting off the inevitable. They were going to lose, and they did. I'm sure they didn't view it as that at the time. You got to fight for your home. Anybody that's ever studied the Confederacy knows you got to fight for your home. So on the way down here in April of 1836, 4 or 5 months after the beginning of the war, Scott ordered Major Cooper, I believe he was a major, to establish this fort as a rest area for the wounded of these conflicts. This is a little less than midway between here and Fort Brooke, between Fort King and Fort Brooke. Fort Dade is over that way. Fort Hope, maybe? That's not right, but there's another fort down that way, even with Fort Dade. I forget the name of it though. And they thought this was obviously a very, very good spot defensively. We're on the banks of Lake Holathlikaha, which is now a dried up bunch of weeds, basically. But back in the day, and I've actually seen this in my lifetime, this was a full-out lake all the way across. But what they didn't know, and they couldn't have known during that time in 1836, was that we're not very far right now from what was then a very major Seminole stronghold. The Seminoles eventually, after they built this fort, found out these guys were here, and of course they came to have something to say about it. The accounts during the siege, which lasted 16 days of constant daily Indian attacks, say that at one time as many as 500 warriors attacked this fort. We know from the historical record that one Georgia volunteer was lost and about 20 were injured, not including those who were already injured who came here. So that's kind of a history of that, in a microcosm of that battle. That siege that took place was probably the longest, one of the longest in Indian wars anywhere. And as we know, the Seminole Wars were the most expensive Indian wars in terms of lives lost, and money expended of all the other Indian wars combined, which is a staggering thought when you consider the popularity of the Western Indian Wars, and even the northeastern woodland Indians. The conflicts up there, they were minor by comparison to the magnitude of what took place down here. So up until 1842, this was a way stop, a scouting station, just a post where it wasn't under attack anymore, where you would find it was a hospital, depot, that sort of thing. Basically a way station between Fort King and Fort Brooke. The Seminole Wars started slacking down in 1838. By then, most of the Indians had retreated to south of Lake Okeechobee, which is the Glades. So, and then nobody wanted to be in the Glades, so nobody cared if the Indians were down there or not at that point. They didn't want them being hostile anymore and killing anyone, but they weren't concerned with their existence at that time. As white history has shown, European history in America has shown, the only time the Indians are concerned is when white people want their land, and then they come and get it. The Cherokee, the Creeks, on and on and on and on. Every time a white person wants your land, he's coming to get it. So that's what happened here. And eventually these Indians got worn down. This was their home. They weren't trying to be at war 24/7. They were raising their families, being at peace just like everybody else. But eventually this area became inundated with soldiers, people who were, and they were backed up by, tens of thousands of more. The Indians had a very limited resource of man and material. So they retreated. The war was officially declared over in 1842. The Armed Occupation Act was enacted shortly thereafter, and that offered people, white people, settlers, a certain amount of land. And then that's a whole other history of our state, where people came in and settled the land wherever they wanted to. We just see it on and on and on. So anyway, this is one of my favorite spots, because we know that in 1970, the state and the private landowner that held this land at the time, who deeded it back to the state as a park, did the archaeological work to determine. And archaeology doesn't just include digging and finding something, it includes corroborating that with the written record. So if so-and-so said we were on the west bank of the Withlacoochee River in a little cove on a hill, and you come over here, there's a big hill, you dig around, you find evidence of the post, you find evidence of all sorts of detritus of camp life, medical equipment, weapons, bullets, food utensils, cups, everything and anything that a European person would use to live, then you know this is it. This is where they were. None of these trees, as we go everywhere else we go, none of these trees would have been here. They would have had an open view of this lake. Any trees that were here at the time would have been cut down to use for support and for firewood, to build tables, chairs, on and on and on. So they have a reenactment here once a year, and just like with all the reenactments, there's a festival and all sorts of things. So they have these chairs over here, these stands rather, for people to view this reenactment. And it's not really so hyperactive or accurate reenactment. It's not, you can't replicate without the actual fort what it looked like for Seminoles to attack the fort. And I'm sure the Seminoles didn't walk right up to the wall and attack it. They were off the bush, where they were hidden and shooting at the fort. So these guys were under siege for 16 days. That's a long time to be out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. No cell phones, no communication. They couldn't even send up a signal flare to let people know. They had to wait until the next column came 16 days later, after the establishment of this fort, from Fort King to get relieved, to not be attacked anymore. So anyway, again, one of my favorite spots, because A, it's a battlefield, B, it's an archaeological fact that this was right here at that time. So we're going back nearly 200 years, 180 however many years. And if we do that, we can imagine these people being not very far from here, the Seminole Creek Indians, having established their lives for many decades before them. So we're going to photograph it, wrap it up, and head on down to the next stop.